Association for Digital Finance. Okay. Sorry about that, I was on mute. Good afternoon to you all and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chilekwa Banda and I'm the chair of the Association for Digital Finance Practitioners in Zambia, and I will be your host this afternoon. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping rules with you all. You will have the opportunities to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom window or screen. It's written Q&A. You may send in your questions anytime during the presentation, and these will be collected by Nicholas and addressed during the Q&A session by our speaker at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to share a brief background of our discussion. The State of Instant and Inclusive Payment Systems, SIIPS, in Africa report is an AfricaNenda initiative together with the World Bank and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. It is an annual think piece that is developed from a detailed assessment of instant payment systems in Africa through mixed research methods that involve conducting an in-depth industry analysis to establish key trends, best practices, and benchmarks to inform the development and scaling of instant and inclusive payment systems to accelerate financial inclusion in Africa. This consumer research was conducted between May and June last year, 2022, and it involved extensive in-country qualitative and quantitative research covering low-income adult individuals and SMEs, MSMEs, across 7 countries, namely the Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, and of course, Zambia. Today, AfricaNenda and the Association for Digital Finance Practitioners in Zambia are collaborating to introduce insights from the SIIPS 2022 Consumer Research Report, and the focus is on Zambia. This session will take 1 hour and will constitute the following sessions, which I will speak into, if you can just look at the screen. So the first part of the session are the opening remarks, which I've just taken you through, and then we'll look at a summary of the report, which will be presented by Jacqueline, who is our facilitator. This will take about 20 minutes. During this time, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section as earlier advised, and then we'll have a question and answer section, which will be presented by Nicholas, who will go through these questions that you may have posted or might post after the Q&A session has started, and they will be answered by Jacqueline and myself and Nicholas. In any case, Jacqueline is the one responding to the questions, and then we'll have 10-minute closing remarks and wrap-up session. Basically, this is our agenda for this afternoon and this morning, depending on where you're reaching us out from. Once again, we welcome you all to share questions by clicking the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screens. Please note that you have an option to stay anonymous as you ask your questions. We will also be sharing a link to the various detailed reports published on the AfricaNenda website shortly. I would now like to hand over to Jacqueline Juma, who is a transformation specialist in financial services and has achieved many successes in Africa, Asia, and other regions through her work with governments, international organizations, and banks to create sustainable economic growth. She is currently the Director of Advocacy and Capacity Development and AfricaNenda. She will share with us insights from the SIIPS 2022 Consumer Research Report, focusing on Zambia. Welcome, Jacqueline, over to you.
Thank you, Chilekwa. A warm welcome to all of you from a cold day in Nairobi. Thank you for joining this conversation today, and feel free to contribute. I will go straight into the presentation and spend the next couple of minutes sharing insights. Yeah, so in terms of the presentation, what to expect in this session today, I'll be looking at 4 key areas, which is just sharing a bit more about the research approach that we used. Again, remember from the introduction by Chilekwa, this is part of what was gathered last year in the SIIPS 2022 research. This year, we're anticipating additional insights and additional markets to add on to our insights. I would also be sharing more in terms of what we are seeing in terms of the payment instruments and channels and the way that they're addressing payment needs and usage. I would also move into understanding the perceptions amongst consumers, what drives them into making digital payments, and what are some of the barriers that are really top of mind that also inhibit their daily usage of digital payments. And then lastly, I'll also share some insights, recommendations that are coming straight from the consumer's side, sharing what they perceive needs to be done in the industry to develop digital payments amongst stakeholders, whether it's from an individual point of view at a household level, as well as the MSMEs. The objective of this research was to provide a consumer perspective that can contribute to decisions necessary for the implementation of IIPS in Zambia. That's instant and inclusive payment systems in Zambia. And quantitative and qualitative data collection was conducted in Lusaka and Ndola in the Copper Belt region last year in May. This involved a total of 60 individuals who are now the end users at household level, as well as 49 MSMEs. And this sample was further broken down into 5 focus discussion groups, 15 in-depth interviews and 5 immersion sessions. And by the immersion sessions, we just mean positioning ourselves in the shoes of customers to better understand their journeys and experiences. So this sample is not nationally representative, as this exercise was intended to draw out insights to inform how instant payment systems can be designed to better meet end user needs. The individual responded categories involved lower income and infrequent income earners, as well as lower income but frequent income earners. So looking at the nuances or the experiences of both those low income earners, low income segment people who have irregular income, as well as those that have regular income. As well as from the MSME side, we considered both the formal and informal micro businesses. In assessing the payments instruments in Zambia and sharing some insights on how they address the needs and the needs amongst both individuals and MSMEs, some highlights of the insights include opportunities in driving digitization. So we established that leading payment needs for individuals are airtime purchases, buying household goods, making payment for transportation, making benevolent contributions, and they gave examples of contributions to family and in incidences or occurrences where they need to contribute amongst friends and families, as well as receiving money. For MSMEs, the leading payment needs are receiving customer payments, supplier payments, sending transportation, as well as airtime allowances to their staff members, that is at the enterprise level, as well as employee salaries. So what we're seeing is that cash usage is prevalent in addressing leading payment needs for individuals and MSMEs, which means that there are significant opportunities to drive digital payments by focusing on these leading need areas. So amongst individuals, we established that opportunities exist in terms of building person-to-person, which we typically call P2P and P2B, that is person-to-business use cases, by creating digital payment mechanisms of making these benevolent contributions and payments for transportation, as well as purchasing household goods. On the MSME side, we see opportunities of developing P2B use cases in enabling the acceptance of digital payments from customers, as you can see, which is like a significant proportion of the residents are considering or are currently receiving the payments in cash. And just developing P2B use cases in enabling the acceptance of these digital payments, as well as business to business use cases where we're promoting digital payments between enterprises and their suppliers. In looking at the usage of digital payments instruments through the respective channels in a period of a month, which is usually the activity level threshold, that is about 30 days. We established that digital payments are predominantly made via USSD and agent network channels. The USSD channels are most preferred because of customer perceptions of their affordability, as well as the prevalence of feature phones among these user groups, even with the general growth of smartphones. Agents are also being highly used by individuals in these segments as cash out options after receiving funds via mobile money. As from the previous slide, there was a high demand for cash out because, again, from this segment, a majority of the users are on the receiving end of mobile money. There is a noticeable difference in the use of mobile money between female-owned and male-owned MSMEs, and responses from some of the immersion sessions by female business owners highlight some challenges that might be contributing to this. Number one, there are some challenges associated with account opening, where to open business accounts. Some of the respondents mentioned that they are required to provide referees who should be existing account holders. And some women reported this is a hurdle, especially those that live in, especially within communities in these segments, considering that a majority of their peers are formally excluded. So it's very difficult to find an account holder or to know about an account holder that would refer you in order for you to open an account. So they just prefer conducting their businesses, payments around their businesses in cash. Number two, a good number also reported that the women business owners are operating unregistered businesses and are unsure of the formalization processes. They therefore prefer to mainly operate in cash or to receive mobile money payments from a few customers into their wallets. Remember, as they manage their businesses, a few of them are already customers to mobile money providers. They have customer wallets. So they are using their customer wallets to accept digital payments in as much as these are typically person to business payments. So when you look at the bigger picture, this data is captured as P2P, but indeed these are P2B transactions. And then there are other challenges that were mentioned that have to do with the fear of getting charged, for instance, and the cost of transacting mobile money, interfering with the margins that are making within their small businesses, amongst others. In looking at some of the consumer behavior and from the point of looking at the barriers and perceptions and drivers for making digital payments, we also wanted to find out what are the leading challenges in terms of making daily digital payments amongst both individuals and MSMEs. From the individuals and from both the individuals and MSMEs perspectives, the leading challenges have to do with unstable networks and poor connectivity, fraud, especially from an individual point, as well as high cost of transacting. And typically, the network problems have to do with, for instance, because USSD is a predominantly used channel, they have trouble with having dropped or lags within the as they conduct the transactions. There are some lapses or there are some lags such that when transactions are initiated, these transactions are not terminated. So there's the fear of continuing to conduct digital payments simply because you might start the transaction and the transaction might not end, or in some instances the transaction goes through and then there's a pending notification, of which the notifications are important as they are evidence that these transactions have occurred. Some of the critical considerations that determine whether these customers use digital payments or not, the respondents have these core items as the things that would really determine whether they are going cashless or they will be conducting digital payment transactions. So in some instances, for instance, security stands out where they feel like it's safer to transact digitally and understand the benefits that come with transacting digitally as opposed to cash. Some of them mentioned that some policies and regulation has really contributed to that migration to digital payments. For instance, in the case of policies around driving digital payments for school fees. Some of the respondents have mentioned that this is actually a driver. So looking at what other government policies would be useful in enabling this digitization of use cases is something that stakeholders should be looking into. And then others just have perspectives of how they manage their personal finances. There's a mention of how digital payments are also championing financial discipline. They're able to look at the inventories of the transactions and make better decisions. It just gives them a picture of how they're managing their finances as opposed to operating in cash. And this is particularly, there's a useful insight in here from the point of where when we were speaking to the especially the micro traders, who particularly have not registered their businesses, but at the same time, they're accepting digital payments via the customer wallets. In as much as their businesses, they don't have particular business accounts, but just having the customer wallet and having to accept digital payments from their customer wallets as a P2P transactions gives them some perspective of how they're conducting their trade, or how they're managing their finances, how they're paying out in terms of paying out to their suppliers. And therefore, they mentioned that this is also something that can move them to open specific business accounts or wallets that are just catering to their businesses. And then there's also the convenience and business benefits, especially those that particularly have the core business of just trading in household commodities, as well as layering that business with, being agents, for example. So they're seeing the convenience that comes with that additional agent business layer that contributes to their income for the business, as well as some who care more so about the transparency and accountability, which is linked to how they manage their personal finances. From the earlier conversation, when I mentioned cash is still king, these are some of the deep reasons why a lot of the stakeholders were mentioning, they would prefer cash. Examples include, and particularly from the differences between the male-owned businesses and the female-owned businesses on this issue of account opening and reference. There's also the issues around customers mentioning that, there's replacement of their IDs is a cumbersome process, and so it limits the use to conduct transactions, especially when they're withdrawing and at agent locations where they need to provide IDs, or just when they're registering and they need to have access to mobile accounts. It's a challenge for them, given that they have no means to identify themselves to authenticate the transactions. There are also challenges to do with access points, particularly mentioning distance to agent or proximity to agent locations. Agents are far or in distant places from making it hard for them to conduct mobile transactions, and especially from a cash-in perspective, because again, the majority in this segment are on the receiving end. They receive funds and they wish to conduct cash-out transactions. Cash-out transactions to particularly withdraw or even just make deposits. There's also the issue of poor customer support, not knowing what to do in the event of a transaction gone wrong, and at the same time, difficulties in locating who to complain to, and also not understanding the processes that involve redress mechanisms. And this also now defaults to, them avoiding using digital payments and just considering cash, because again, the processes are too either complex, or they don't have a full understanding of how redress is to be addressed. We also zero into specific users to just understand what their experience has been in terms of the journey and some of the barriers. And for instance, within the report, which I would encourage all of you to go and read go through additional insights that would establish what to do within the sector. We have our highlighted representatives of MSMEs. This is one Naftali, who also happens to be a mobile money agent. And in experiencing what Naftali has gone through, there are those cons and pros that he has shared. So in this case, he mentions some of the considerations that we've been talking about, the advantages that have attracted him into conducting transactions, for example, his ability to activate micro savings from sub-wallets, or encouraging him to, to explore value-added services, to even other positives of earning commissions as being an agent, and also contributing to his income both as an individual and as a business owner, and also sharing his barriers or his experiences in terms of challenges in his user journey experience, where he again emphasizes challenges to do with the network. The network is usually down, and they are forced to turn into cash transactions, as earlier explained or as earlier highlighted. Because of his location, and because he is in the business that requires a lot of electricity supply by running his cyber cafe, he from time to time experiences this electricity supply cuts, and therefore he defaults to the use of the feature phones because, again, of the battery life as opposed to smartphones. So by default, he is forced to use USSD channels because he's using the feature phones, which have a longer battery life than in as much as he has a smartphone. So there's some indications, and generally even from what we gathered in the market, that despite the growth in smartphones, there's the preference, especially amongst MSMEs, to default to use feature phones to access their menus when it comes to digital payments. Again, because the smartphones, which are predominantly used for marketing their services, they're not used primarily for conducting mobile money transactions. Again, just so that they're secure in terms of the battery charge and availability in terms of accessing the menus. And then he also speaks to other delays, in trying to verify transactions, also attributed to slowness or poor connectivity and network issues. In terms of the recommendations on expanding digital payment options, there are so many recommendations which can be bundled into 3 groups. So the question that was extended to customers was, in your opinion, what should be done to make digital payments more instant and inclusive? And some of the responses that came had to do with there's the sensitization that needs to happen. So stakeholders within the Zambian context need to drive sensitization into making sure that customers understand, how they can leverage the different use cases being showcased in addressing their individual needs. Because remember, from a payment perspective, we noted earlier the differences in the leading need areas. For instance, from an individual point of view, there's a lot of the customers are talking about the opportunity to digitize transportation, because even from the MSMEs angle, they have a duty to pay allowances for transportation to their staff members. So this use case is emerging as a big use case, as well as merchant payments, which involves just facilitating digital payments when it comes to individuals buying household commodities. So this sensitization is expected around what these use cases mean in terms of addressing the pain points of the users, and particularly MSMEs. Again, there's a category of championing improved access points, especially in the remote areas where there are no banks and no agents and a few mobile money outlets. So in their opinion, they're feeling that to drive digital payments, if only these access points can be better spread or made ubiquitous, so that more users from both an individual or a household perspective as well as MSMEs can leverage. And given that there are all these from the segment, and again, referring to earlier slides, where a lot of the individuals are mostly on the receiving end, in terms of mobile money use cases, that is P2P, they wish that they can have access to either cash out points within their localities, and also extend this, access points to drive the marketing campaigns, or even to drive the knowledge of driving knowledge of using digital payments, such that the agents can contribute a lot in terms of the education and championing self-initiated transactions amongst customers. So using these agent access points as both points of transactions, but also in the endeavor to grow digital payments, these agents can also serve as intermediaries that can champion the education around self-initiated transactions, how this is beneficial, and making additional digital payments transactions, as opposed to just relying on cash in and cash out transactions. And then lastly is also a group of responses that had to do with the consumer records mechanisms to be in place, and this should be robust to support trust and to drive trust amongst users, because again, if they are not sure of how to handle instances where transactions are hanging, or just in the event that they're unable to resolve their challenge, it goes again to tarnish the trust that most of these people are building around digital payments. So if these mechanisms can be well outlaid and even mostly driven by agents, again, to drive and leverage that human-to-human interactions, they are requesting that these mechanisms should be well understood and well designed to support that trust, and to promote day-to-day digital payments in the market. I would like to stop there, but most importantly, I would like to encourage you to join, to log into our website for more insights. We have the SIIPS microsite within the AfricaNenda website, where you can get insights to do with this consumer research focusing on Zambia, but also the larger flagship report from 2022, which looks at the state of instant and inclusive payment systems from a continent point of view. I have no doubt that there's some knowledge that can be shared as to what is happening from other markets that can contribute to the development of instant and inclusive payment systems in Zambia. And also just to request you to be on the lookout for our 2023 instant and inclusive payment system main report coming up in the last quarter of 2023, as well as to look out for more consumer research insights from other markets, focusing on other markets this year, that can also share some perspectives of what stakeholders are doing, or responses from the consumer side that can also be instrumental in the way we are designing instant and inclusive payment systems. So happy to also hear from you in terms of questions, in terms of comments and responses from the email address, as you can see on the screen. After having gone through the detailed insights, we'll be available to answer any of the questions, and let's engage. So thank you. I'd like to hand over to Nicholas for the next session, which is on questions and answers. Thank you. Nicholas, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, participants. We're so glad to have you on this webinar. I think we'll go straight into it. First of all, we have a question from Anonymous, and the first question is, what are the key factors that influence consumers' perceptions of digital payments? What are the key factors that influence consumers' perceptions of digital payments? Jacqueline, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Thank you. I think the question is coming right after I just spoken about it. So I think it's good enough for me to just go back into the slides and share some of these factors because I think they were highlighted very well. I'll just share in a second. Let me know whether you can see the slides. Nicholas,
we can see this.
Yes,
we can see the slide, Jackie.
Yes, so some of the factors that I know this is not all, and again, we're just sharing some few insights from the detailed report, which again, I encourage all of us to go through. But looking at some of these factors, these are the the determinants of whether, the determinants. These are the things that are top of mind when users are decisioning on whether to make cash transactions or payments, because again, they're looking at how these factors are leaning in favor of, digital payments or, how they're promoting the adoption of digital payments. So I think I had mentioned the security and gave details of how this is a factor that, users are taking into consideration, moving away from cash and the risks that are involved in carrying cash. And I think, gave the example of how they have an understanding of how policies, and especially this policy around school fee payment, has to do with driving daily digital payments, because it's just introducing this new use case and building on the adoption of digital payments, as well as other interests around transparency, managing how they manage their personal finance, and they mentioned how they're being encouraged to conduct digital payments and even have separate tills or business tills for purposes of just having a better a view of how they're managing their finances from a business point of view. So I think maybe this slide answers to that question, and let's see if we have other questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Next up, we have another question, which is, what are the common barriers that prevent consumers from embracing digital payment solutions? I think this is right on top of the previous question.
Yes, again, these are factors that can be looked for or against, but in terms of the barriers, again, just to revisit the details of some of the leading challenges, from the customer side, and in terms of how they feel, these are some of the challenges, as well as poor connectivity, from the sense that a few of the customers mentioned that sometimes you can initiate a transaction and the transaction is not terminated, or the transaction doesn't go through. So from that point, they're not sure whether, and I mean, tying this to the fact that the customer support is poor and issue resolution is not well defined, it eats into the trust that has already been built over time in conducting digital transactions. So looking at both how they are able to, and I mean, the challenges that have to do with poor connectivity, and in the event that something happens, they're not able to clearly have their issues addressed. These are some of the things that really eat into the confidence that comes with digital payments, especially at that segment, at the level of that segment.
Okay, Thank you very much. So from Steve Haley, we have the following question. We have the following question, and it says, the MMO agent who preferred an agent transaction to a merchant transaction seems common. Does anyone have an answer to it? MMOs and other non-banks will be crucial to merchant acquisition at scale, but not if they cannot solve that.
Okay, I think the question speaks to facilitating digital payments, P2B transactions, but from a P2P point of view, if I'm getting that right.
Yes.
Yeah, so
the MMO agent, yes.
Yes, come again, sorry.
The MMO agent who preferred an agent transaction to a merchant transaction seems common. Does anyone have an answer to it? Maybe we can tackle that first before we go into the second part of the question.
Okay, I will share perspectives, what I've seen in other markets, but not necessarily from Zambia. But also, I'm happy to welcome, stakeholders to chime in. Chilekwa, yourself, who sit in Zambia and can share the Zambian perspectives. I think I've seen it even in other markets, for instance, Kenya, where you go to a small business, you try to make a digital payment, and the trader has, in as much as they have business deals, but they would tell you, instead of making a person-to-business transaction to make this digital payment, would you withdraw the funds? Because either I'm also an agent or there's an agent next door. So what happens is, me as a customer, I would now go to either go to the agent to withdraw, so that I can bring the cash back to this merchant. And so my understanding is that they're avoiding, to some extent, there are some challenges that have to do with, at the end of the day, after they have accepted all the payments in digital means, is there a charge that they incur when it comes to cashing out, or at the point when they are forced to move out the funds from the business team? If there's a charge that that they have to incur, then they would rather not accept the payments digitally, but they would rather ask you as a customer to go and withdraw these funds from an agent, so that they're not faced with that charge. Because again, when you look at things, it eats into the margins of the types of products that they're trying to sell, or eats into the margins of their income. So again, what I've seen happening is the financial service providers get to sit with the merchants to get to understand what can be deemed as favorable in terms of charges, if the charges is really necessary, or trying to build other incentives in accepting digital payments. Because again, merchants can be very influential in terms of digital staircase, to influence customers to build, to transact digitally. But at the same time, if they're not incentivized, if they don't feel like there's something that is really big in need for them, then they're bound to frustrate the whole digital payments aspect. That is from a P2B point of view. Or, as you've heard today, some of them would just say, let's just conduct this as a P2P transaction and kindly also include the charges, because at the end of the day, I need to withdraw. And then the charge is passed on to the customer, who now again perceives that this transaction is expensive. Conducting digital payments is a bit expensive. So I'm happy to also hear from perspectives of what other stakeholders have done in the Zambian context. Perhaps you can share, or Chilekwa.
Yes, I'll go first. So Zambia right now, it's an exciting, very exciting market. So what we're seeing is before, whenever you'd be buying vegetables or buying maize, any from little shop by the corner, normally it would be cash. But we're seeing a very quick upward trend where all these shops, the market traders on the streets, they first of all started accepting mobile wallets, whether it be MTN, Airtel, or Zamtel. But now what we're now seeing is that apart from just doing a P2P, they're turning their accounts into business accounts, business e-wallets. So it's now becoming P2B. And it's very encouraging because whereas before customers would have challenges with getting change or not having sufficient money, we're seeing that upward trend. So digital transactions are on a very good projectile going upwards. I don't know what you think about that. My comments, Chilekwa.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. Based on what Jacqueline mentioned last it's actually nice to hear that it's not peculiar to Zambia. You know, the issue of the agent asking the customer that the withdrawal fee. That is something that is common in Zambia. And we're finding that because of that, like you've explained, Jacqueline, you find that the customer or the consumer feels like they're being robbed of their transaction, right? But then from the agent's perspective, you discover that those who are not merchants but want to transact because obviously they don't want to lose a customer that doesn't have cash to the digital, right? They're forced to do that, but most of them are not the retail store owners. So they'll request for that withdrawal fee because they know that they will have to withdraw on behalf of their owner, the shop owner, and then they have to obviously cash in at the end of the day. But then there's also a question around every payment that goes through that has a withdrawal charge attached to it. It's not like when the shopkeeper or shop attendant, for instance, goes to withdraw that amount, they are withdrawing little amounts, they're withdrawing the bulk amount. So are those withdrawal fees adding up to the actual transaction fee that the MNOs are coming up with? I think that's a conversation that we should definitely look into.
Super.
So up next, right on top of that question, we did have a second part to that question, and it read, MMOs and non-banks will be crucial to merchant acquisition at scale. But if not, how can they solve that?
I'm not sure I understand what the if not means, because I think there's needs to be, I think we all agree from just what I'm hearing, that there's need for a push in terms of the financial service providers to promote these digital payments and particularly to incentivize the merchants to accept digital payments. We have seen challenges and some of them we have highlighted today, but I see the most value in trying to shift the attention away from the funds or the cost at the end of the day to other incentives, non-fee incentives, so that, again, the value-added services, when it comes to weighing the value-added services of transacting in digital payments, is outstanding or supersedes accepting transactions, accepting payments in cash, particularly, for instance, offering solutions that have to do with tracking these digital payments, transactions, and layering, maybe extending access to finance, or loans or any other incentives that are not necessarily tied to the amounts that the merchants would be charged when cashing out or when paying out to their suppliers, for example, but introducing other benefits beyond just zeroing in onto the fees that are involved.
Okay, so the next question is taking us right opposite now, I think, on your earlier presentation, and it's asked, the question is all about what recommendations are there that a country like Zambia can implement that will expand or introduce that payment experience for consumers?
I think I can throw this question to Chilekwa. Sorry for throwing you under the bus, but I'll give you an opportunity to maybe just share, because I think we've been having these conversations from the time we had the first insights, and then I can come in to share recommendations from other clients.
Chilekwa?
Right. Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, I think for me on a personal note, I mean, based also off of my experience, not as a digital financial services enthusiast, but also as a consumer of a business, right? When you look at the current challenges that are not only affecting Zambia, but also on a global scale, I mean, which is the reason this report is an African report, right? Because mobile money is peculiar to Africa. I think the biggest hurdle is in education, right? And once we can tackle how to communicate effectively with our end users, with the consumers, there's so much research that is happening right now. We have so many organizations doing research, but it shouldn't end on the data. I mean, an example is now, all the participants that are attending right now should take these conversations back to their organizations, right? We've shared the data. So what happens now? How do we improve as a collective, as an ecosystem that is providing digital payments? We need to start with education. So are we sharing the right information in our digital marketing strategies? Are we actually reaching out to that last mile customer that doesn't actually understand how to use a smartphone? Because they're still there. Whether we have your mobile penetration rates going higher every year, we still have that person that says, I still want to see cash in my hands. So I think education is where I would pose the biggest drive towards pushing this agenda.
Thank you, Chilekwa. I think I may add maybe just 2 points. The first one is, I think, and from this, from what I've seen in Zambia, there's a very strong insight, powerful insight, which I would like to speak about. And this is on the need for addressing needs as opposed to just digitizing use cases. For instance, where an MSME trader mentions that, you know, I have a smartphone, yes, but I prefer to use the feature phone. And they have their reasons. There are issues to do with the cost of data. There's the issues to do with the charge and the longevity of the battery charge between the smartphone and the feature phone. And it's not like they're not aware that they're not aware that there are apps that they can be used, but their preference, they're defaulted to USSD because the tools of trade are in favor of the feature phone. So again, in terms of developing, we're seeing the development of apps, particularly for, as channels towards making digital payments. But again, we need to understand the realities or the contextual nuances, especially for low-income segment earners. There are challenges to do with electricity, as even mentioned in the use case or in the insights today. There are challenges to do with electricity, and that also translates to the inability of or preference for phones that can hold charge for long. And in developing or designing instruments, channels, and use cases, I think it's important that whatever is being delivered by financial service providers goes beyond just the general market trends. Yes, the growth in smartphones, but to really dig deep and see what are the needs and what is really going to be a motivation in terms of maximizing transactions from the part of users. Secondly, something else that can champion or can drive this digital payments amongst users, and especially from the insights that I'm hearing, is clear or concise redressal mechanisms, because again, mobile money is growing all over in Africa, mobile money is growing in Zambia, digital payments are growing in Zambia. But then again, if we don't design well-outlined recourse mechanisms and also just using the agents for that last mile education in the process, then we lose out on the little trust that has been built over time. Because again, yes, people have an understanding in what to transact, but if it's not, if the services are not reliable, then they will default to cash, not because they don't understand, not because they're not educated, not because they don't have accounts, or not because they don't have wallets. It's simply because the processes are not in favor, and so they cannot trust that they're able to do transactions with the convenience that is expected. I think that's what I can share for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. So right on top of that, we do have another question, and I think it's something that I'm also quite interested in learning from you. So the question is, in terms of technological infrastructure that's needed what technological infrastructure can be used to support these merchants transactions in countries such as Zambia? And maybe if I may add my own question on top, our merchant transactional volumes, are they high enough when you compare them to other countries?
So the challenge with the, okay, so I'll throw the first question to you, Nicholas, and I'll choose to answer your question, which is on the volumes in terms of merchants. Although we have not really done a country-to-country comparison of merchant transactional data, but I just wanted to highlight that this exercise is a bit challenging to conduct because of, like I mentioned, and like you've heard today, that many of the merchant payments are happening as P2Ps, and therefore they're not captured in their rightful buckets. When you hear of customers who, merchants who are also customers to mobile money providers, they either prefer to conduct transaction in cash, or because they are existing customers to mobile money operators, they just accept digital payments as P2P transfers. So they just, again, that transaction, that P2P transaction in this instance, which is supposed to be a P2B transaction, is hidden in terms of that comparison. Hence the challenge of saying that, in terms of the P2B or the merchant payment transactions, this is the figure in country X, and in country Y, this is the figure. The other thing is on the challenges around data sharing and making data available. Like, for instance, from our SIIPS research last year and this year, we've realized that it's very difficult to have access to data and information that contributes to making analysis that helps in making decisions on how to implement instant and inclusive payment systems, and particularly to address different use cases, P2B, P2P, simply because this data is not available, and there's it's also unclear in what needs to be captured, especially now that there's a lot of attention in reporting cash in and cash out. Anything that is beyond cash in and cash out, we have seen that it's a challenge to report these transactions, both in terms of volumes and values. And what I'd just like to end this discussion is by saying that we would encourage more, especially regulators, payment scheme operators, to share this data beyond what we are seeing in terms of cash in, cash out, because the cash in, cash out transactions don't really give a picture of what is, what is happening, what are the trends in digital payments, for instance, what is truly happening within P2P transactions or P2B transactions, or any other transactions following the use cases in the markets. I think maybe I've tried to answer your question, Nicholas. So over to you to answer the first question. Thank you.
Okay. Technological infrastructure. So I think in Jackie's introduction, she did mention that part of what the work that AfricaNenda does is basically we're pushing the agenda for IIPS platforms across the continent. And in that, we're talking of systems which are instant, systems which are irrevocable, and there is a question based on that, systems which are safe. So basically, when we're talking of what type of infrastructure, Africa right now, we've got different payment systems which are in place in many countries. Some are open, some are closed. But there's one thing they have in common, which are use cases. And those use cases is what basically, I think, falls in line with this question, which is use cases that will allow merchants transactions to be enabled across Africa. And it's interesting. One of the instances we've come across is that we've been looking at several payment systems which are available, such as UPI, such as Moduloop, and there are several others. specifically talking into Moduloop. Moduloop is basically a software that allows merchant transactions both from telco or commercial banks, and it's very interesting. So the answer may be both the hardware, which is the easy part, the servers and the stuff, the networks, but on the software part, I think that's where the main matter is. So it's a combination of both, and dependent on each country's circumstances, the answer may slightly differ in terms of final solution. Maybe just at this moment, there is a question though from Babaka Ndiaye. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the question is, in terms of irrevocability in the field of instant payments, is it really useful for customers in making them have trust in the area of IIPS platforms? Chilekwa, Jackie, and that would be our last question. We're running out of time.
I think the jury is still out there. Irrevocability is one of those principles that have, been commonly identified as one of the principles that can drive, instant payment systems to be inclusive. So I think there's a lot of room for identifying or making, conducting studies to see how well this principle can be applied, especially in the wake of challenges to do with trust and the inability to, to reverse this transaction, and the implications to the uptake of digital financial services in the event that these transactions are not irrevocable. For now, I don't think I have an answer that what is the best way forward in terms of applying this, but I'm hopeful that it is something that together as an industry would be looking into, and particularly AfricaNenda, because again, in championing instant payment systems that are inclusive, it's important to weigh in on the principles and how well they should be applied and to what extent they influence the adoption of digital payments. So for now, I can leave it as a research question. I don't know if anyone else has an answer to that.
No, thank you very much, Jackie, for that. And thank you very much to all the viewers who sent for the questions, Babaka Ndiaye, Steve Haley, and the many others who've posted questions. At this time, I'd like to hand over to Chilekwa.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the event. This was a webinar on the SIIPS 2022 Consumer Research Report on Zambia. If you have any further questions or comments, or if you would like to know more about AfricaNenda or the report, or simply want to find out more about the Association for Digital Finance Practitioners in Zambia and what we do, please visit our social media pages on LinkedIn and Facebook. We will also share these in the comment section shortly. And also, if you would like to give us some feedback on the webinar, you will receive a survey on the once you log out of the webinar. And you will also receive an email within 48 hours to just share the link for you to view the webinar recording. We know there was a lot of information being shared, and it's obviously a lot to consume, but the link to the report will give you some deeper insights into what this report entails. And on behalf of the Association for Digital Finance Practitioners in Zambia, our presenter, Jacqueline, and our co-facilitator, Nicholas, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and do enjoy the rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are reaching us from. Have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.